All right, Bobs, we're back with Napoleon, Bisexual Emperor, Major General Frank Richardson, MD. We resume at page 86. I had to go back and refresh myself because I didn't recall any of this. It had something to do with Napoleon spilling coffee down someone's blouse or something. There are stories of encounters with young married couples which suggest that he may have been led into a subtle brand of cruelty by envy of their happiness and love for one another. Jealousy can lead to a desire to be hurtful. For example, when he met Laurie Junot just after her marriage, he was so mean as to ask if she knew about the harem which her husband had kept in Egypt. Oh man, I mean it's a fair question. Hey, Bobs, did you know that Frank, what was her husband's name? Frank was banging a bunch of babes. It was particularly mean spirited and lacking in finer feelings to make such a remark to a woman whom he had known as a child and whose husband was one of his most devoted followers. Andak Junot had been Napoleon's first aide de camp, and his career had prospered along with that of his hero, for whom he had a profound admiration. Another young couple figured in a story which Bonaparte told to Madame de Bourrienne. A devoted young wife, visiting her husband for one day at Toulon, begged the general to exempt him from duty, as he had had a strong premonition of death. Madame de Bourrienne described the charming but savage gaiety and exultation with which Bonaparte spoke of his stern refusal to be moved by the poor girl's tears, and the horrible minuteness with which he told how the young husband had been cut in two by a bomb. One version of this story adds that Napoleon laughed heartily as he named the part which was taken off. Feminine intuition may have given Madame de Bourrienne an inkling of the deep springs of jealousy from which the exultant laughter was welling. For she said that this was one of those specimens of fierce hilarity which I greatly dislike, and which prejudiced me against him. We may share her prejudice, but our distaste for this unpleasant side of Napoleon's character. I mean, the guy was a dictator killing everyone. And that's his unpleasant side? Of Napoleon's character can be tempered by understanding if we believe that it may have been to some extent a reflection of his failure to achieve perfect happiness in family life, and also his libido. After his second marriage, he told Metternich that he had always yearned for a home and that his longing had now become a reality. But it was not to last for long, and to achieve it he had to suffer prolonged mental torment in deciding to divorce the companionable Josephine. His own lack of success seemed to stimulate an inordinate inquisitiveness about other people's married lives, and he would ask them extremely personal questions. He had a mania for arranging, and indeed for disarranging marriages. His meddling often had most unhappy results, not only in his own family, but among his subjects, whom he seemed to treat as a human stud farm whereby he could vicariously gratify his own desire to establish a family. As the effective head of the Bonaparte family, on which he was determined to found a dynasty, he naturally concerned himself with the marriages of his brothers and sisters. All right, I gotta sneeze. And in his zeal for the creation of his instant aristocracy, he made noble heiresses marry his parvenu generals, and tried to marry his younger officers into the old aristocracy. General Rapp was repeatedly told, "It is my wish that you should marry," and he was finally given two ladies to choose from. In his memoirs, Rapp wrote sadly, "My marriage was brought about, but unfortunately it did not prove a happy one." Napoleon's marriage market catered even for his valets. When engaging Marchand as his premier valet de chambre, after Constance's desertion, he said, I will look after you. I will marry you. Another valet, Antion Saint Denis, managed to arrange his own marriage in St. Helena to Miss Hall, governess to the Bertrand family. When in due course she became pregnant, Napoleon teased Saint Denis unmercifully, telling him that an ugly Chinaman had been making love to his wife in his absence. You think the child will be yours? You'll be nicely caught, won't you? If she produces an ugly, dirty little Chinaman, what are we to think of a great man who would stoop to this sort of thing with his valet? Well, in this instant, I think he's probably just joking. The other one, where he's mentioned that his person was chopped in half in battle, that's a bit different. This, I mean, maybe this guy's never been around other dudes, but you always make fun of people when you're a broski. So that could just be broski talk, but we don't know his valet, so. Of course, he had to rule everyone's lives, to have a finger in every pie. Some of his everlasting prying and meddling in the matrimonial affairs of others may have been genuine kindly interest, the desire which married people often show to push bachelors into marriage. He might even have wanted to help them to find the genuine happiness which somehow eluded him. But I do not think we can entirely acquit him of the charge that it may have been a form of voyeurism, a characteristic failing of men of weak sexuality, Jesus Christ, which, contrary to popular belief, is, I think, the kind of man Napoleon was. His own admissions and the revelations of Josephine clearly imply that of the symptoms of organ inferiority detailed by Adler, the most important one to Napoleon was impotence, which is discussed in my next chapter. Consideration of Napoleon's nervous ischia, reported by the observant Dr. Ivan, the periods after the abbreviations, was deferred to this point because of its possible association with organ inferiority. Why is organ inferiority get capitalized? Which, according to Adler, leads to urinary trouble, such as difficulty in passing water, especially in public. Well, if this guy's a doctor, he would know that when you have kidney stones, which is probably why he was having trouble passing water, it does lead to some form of impotence. As I can attest to, when I had a kidney stone, trust me, you weren't worried about that organ inferiority, buddy. You were worried about surviving. Many observers described Napoleon's difficulty in passing water and how, when unable to do so, he would stand for long periods with his forehead pressed against the wall or the breech of a gun. He himself said about his bladder, "This is my weak point. I shall perish from that." Instead of invoking an abstruse psychological mechanism to account for Napoleon's bladder troubles, it might be easier to join the ranks of the medical writers who have attributed his dysuria to some physical cause, such as stones. You think? You think, Bubba? Schistosomiasis or some form of venereal infection. I'm going to guess that he had a huge kidney stone. It seems unlikely that the small calculi or gravel found in his bladder at the autopsy could have been present for many years without growing larger or causing serious kidney trouble. Perhaps Napoleon incurred the risk of venereal infection, and if he did suffer from such a condition, history might have preserved a discreet silence, whilst his doctor would have been bound by professional secrecy. The only evidence of which I am aware is in the report of one of the Allied commissioners who were taking him to Elba, that Napoleon was suffering from an amatory complaint, for which he applied treatment in the presence of the commissioners, without reserve. But the Prussian Count Truches von Waldberg, what a name, who made the statement, was such a hostile witness that I would not care on his evidence alone to support an unsavory allegation, which otherwise rests entirely on innuendo and tittle-tattle. Dr. Hilleman, minus the period after the doctor. I don't know how you can publish a book and leave out all the The periods, how? Dr. Hilleman wisely points out that as Napoleon was counting on Marie Louise joining him in Elba, he would hardly have allowed the commissioners to see that he was suffering from any such complaint. If von Truxis saw anything, it was probably Napoleon having his usual trouble in passing water. I reject also the allegations of unbridled lust and various sexual perversions which were made against Napoleon. It was an age in which no holds were barred in political satire, and Napoleon seems to have paid little heed to the scandal mongering which probably grew from envy of the astounding heights to which he had raised himself and many of his relatives. There is certainly no need to peep through keyholes or lend an ear to scandal for an insight into the great man's private life. Thriving on the world's attention, he had an irrepressible urge to write, dictate, and to talk and talk and talk about anything which interested him, which meant everything but especially himself. It is this which makes it possible to compile his case history and to hazard an opinion about the psychological influences which helped to mold his character. Before summarizing the factors which have emerged in this chapter and the previous one and the deductions to which they have led me, I must emphasize that since psychology is by no means an exact science, are you kidding me? Come on, buddy. It's perfect science. It is understandable that interpretations of their significance should vary. A picture which pleases one critic may be a meaningless daub to another, so it is not surprising that no historical or psychological portrait of Napoleon completely satisfied the biographer Jacques Bainville. Whilst agreeing with him that Napoleon cannot be confined within the dimensions of any circumscribed psychological portrait, I believe that shafts of light, illuminating a corner here and there, can be directed upon the vast canvas by the disciples of each one of the triumvirate, Freud, Jung, and Adler. Since Freud revealed the influence of the unconscious mind upon the formation of our personalities, it has been impossible to doubt its profound significance. For Jung, it was our common inheritance from our ancestors, the collective or racial unconscious mind which came to acquire particular importance. And for his followers, the key to Napoleon's mind need perhaps he sought only in the Corsican character and in the various racial springs which have contributed to its development. All psychologists recognize the importance of environmental and parental influences in our earliest years, and Napoleon's family background with a weak father and dominant mother was typical of that which, according to Freud, produces homosexual sons. There are ample indications that he was of a neurotic disposition, and possible causes of neurosis and emotional disturbance were feelings of inferiority arising less from his height than from such factors as his curiously ambivalent attitude to his Corsican birth. Aggressiveness caused by such feelings of inferiority was intensified by the psychological mechanisms which affect second sons. I mean, the whole second sons thing is, that's more iffy than Freud, and perhaps by being replaced as the baby of the family at the sensitive age of 6. But the picture is dominated by the organ inferiority associated with his feminine build and hypogonadism, from which Adler's teaching would lead us to expect him to experience psychological impotence, fear of love, women, and marriage, and an exaggeration of traits which the unconscious mind associates with maleness, such as strength, power, cruelty, and coarseness. As an example of overcompensation, Adler was fond of pointing out that Demosthenes, who stuttered, forced himself to become the greatest orator in Greece. The feminine build, or gynandromorphy, revealed that the post-mortem examination could have been the unconscious spur which drove Napoleon to play the part of a great lover and seducer, which is the role many people believe he did play. Now, after some rather didactic excursions into the field of psychological theorization, we can return with relief, perhaps, to the story of Napoleon, and again allow him to speak for himself. Oh, this guy seems to have backtracked in these last 3 or 4 pages on everything he said previously, except the organ inferiority. So, yeah, bizarre book so far.